Hello, I'm Toby Robbins. I've been weaving in and out of the education establishment for most of the last 20 years as an educator, consultant, governor, trustee and disruptive sideways and independent observer. Amongst all of this, and alongside my work and interest in many other sectors, I currently chair a local cultural education partnership in East Anglia. Reflecting on this experience, my considered and distilled theory of education, admittedly as a rank outsider, but also as an informed resident of the real world, is that it should ultimately be a concerted exercise in actively encouraging and enabling children and young people not to think like us, to be bold enough to step beyond what we, their predecessors, have done, thought and created. In other words, to construct an educational environment that encourages and values creativity, widens horizons and amplifies and crucially listens to young voices. But these horizons should not be ones that we ourselves know and impose. In my view, it's not about incrementally revealing our own knowledge base, building towards a huge ta-da moment when suddenly everything becomes clear, as if presenting a sacred gift. A moment when we have inadvertently or perhaps deliberately cloned ourselves along with the same assumptions and inadequacies as us. Teaching and learning the fundamental and foundational basics is clearly vital. But again, these should present a point of departure, not represent a stagnant destination in themselves. It's undeniably true that all positive advances are born of thinking different, evolutionary, even revolutionary thoughts. Meaningful progress is rarely made by recreating and perpetuating what has gone before. After all, any calm assessment of the catastrophic mess and current and previous generations have created would strongly suggest other paths are necessary and desirable. Just how inaccurately most education systems reflect the current interests and priorities of the young people they seek to serve illustrates how disconnected, self-obsessed and inadequate most systems are. The obvious medium through which creativity can be nurtured and explored is through the artistic and cultural doorway. Unfortunately, due to the prevailing systemic hierarchy of taught subjects, arts and culture have always been the poor relation within the education system. More tragically, they often appear to be the dead relatives. Mass education should predominantly be about the provision of a theatre of knowledge, understanding and exploration, not seeking to embed our own worldview, or even worse, that of any transient establishment authority, as being the final accepted word. Our job as grown-ups, more to provide the stage than to write the play. To aid this, a young person's experience in emerging life adventure, particularly in the cultural and creative realm, should start at the narrow end of the funnel, not the other way round. In my own peculiar journey through the educational landscape, I've come across few individuals who haven't in some sense known all of this. And yet, I've encountered too many individuals and organisations whose own professional clarity, however previously noble, has been seduced and twisted by a single peripheral subject: money. And money has become one giant red herring, the prevailing spotlight that often blinds but poorly illuminates. The presence of money has somehow come to suggest permission or righteousness, that if funds are available then, and only then, is something worth pursuing. In the educational context, the lack of consistent and sustained funding for artistic and cultural activity, coupled with the persistent subordination of these subjects, has embedded an environment that has offered little opportunity. This prevailing situation has, by extension, often been used as a lazy and indicative code, either by policymakers and or service providers, for identifying what should be given consideration and what is less important. This equally provides a useful strategic tool to engineer focus and to lever and manipulate the system. Don't get me wrong, money is a spectacularly important enabler, and in a market-driven economy it has an unavoidable influence, but it should not be allowed to become the prism through which all things are viewed and intrinsic value implied. This is particularly true where we are considering the precious commodities of authentic self-expression, cultural capital, creativity and critical thinking, virtues, knowledge and abilities that current political narrative would suggest are vital to the nation's future prosperity and an individual's self-realisation. Money is obviously a massive deal, but my point is this: should it bookend and overwhelm the conversation? But what if funds are not readily available? Does this mean we stop? Does the absence of funds immediately suggest the absence of value and worth? Most obviously not. This is where I think we cross the line between administrativism, the functional implementation of what is funded, and activism, where implementation remains morally, intellectually and structurally vital, but funds are no longer assured or deployed. Which brings us to our current frictional interface between what is funded and structurally supported and what must continue irrespective of funding availability or structural support. Since 2015, through the establishment of the original pilot local cultural education partnerships, there's been a sparkling opportunity to add to the diversity of thought, awareness and activity through cross-fertilisation and osmosis between the educational establishment and the cultural and artistic sectors. Specific funding has been deployed towards this goal. I think LSEPs exist at the pioneering forefront of a more distributed and enlightened education system, one with more porous boundaries where symbiotic relationships can develop between unconnected and complementary organisations and sectors. The central idea is very firm-rooted, not groundbreaking or radical, but pragmatically obvious. Working together, filling the gaps, creating opportunities, noble ideals and aspirations, and an exemplar of what can be achieved through cross-sector working. But even these clear-sighted partnerships have occasionally drifted towards a financially weighted outlook, with their impact blunted by the reductive gravitational pull of money. LSEPs, at their best, are catalytic mechanisms that have provided a rallying point and have successfully proposed and implemented the case for the transformative importance of art and culture in schools. I've come to see this advocacy function as the underrated but often underexploited powerful bonus feature of LSEPs, and one that actually requires very little money, just deep authentic conviction. This again presents a tantalising moment where arts and cultural education can gain traction and make progress without central financial lubrication. Systemic and artificial barriers to ideas and opportunity have been lowered and a more free-flowing market has become possible. Interestingly, this has been made possible by a spirit of enterprising determination, curiosity and commitment amongst partners. The models, the very attributes of the art sector that are so prized. This move forward has also revealed the potential foundations of a post-funded model where partnership working, cooperation and resource sharing are the underpinning drivers and mechanisms, not money. As the current movers and shakers who influence the direction of travel, our greatest ongoing contribution is to emulate and reflect the same sense of restless progress and impatience that we see in children and young people. At the centre of the LSEP project has been bridge organisations. These have been a vital component within the machine, without which it would have been impossible for the partnerships to have been born or exist. The contemporary conversation concerning LSEPs revolves around their continued existence beyond March 2023, when bridge organisations may or may not continue to exist in their current format. The wisdom or casual suggestion of their potential dismantling or restructuring is questionable. However, I suspect this too can be viewed through a fiscal lens. The mere existence and success of many partnerships is evidence enough of their need and of the willingness and eagerness to work together. But the premature and ill-timed hobbling of the very organisations that support many of them seems short-sighted and perverse, except, of course, if you can artificially propose that LSEPs are in a position to be financially or administratively self-sustaining. They're not. The cold truth is that bridges and LSEPs are, in most instances, codependent. Would bridges have achieved their network reach had LSEPs not existed? Would LSEPs have been born and flourished had bridges not existed? This educational cultural ecosystem has been created and needs to be nurtured beyond its developmental infancy. Very little of financial value is created in short order, but this is a further possible example of accountancy trumping reality. Equally, LSEPs represent something that conclusively transcends the balance sheet. Actions that, based on shared goals, cooperation, conviction and a vision of what can be achieved once we accept that we are collectively more impactful. I would argue that this has been the most potent fuel that has propelled LSEPs to their current standpoint. I do acknowledge that money has been seeded this momentum, but the repayment dividend has far outweighed the initial investment. Conversely, this momentum is one of the most compelling reasons why funding should be increased and accelerated. But no matter. In crude financial terms, many of the individuals who constitute LSEPs contribute as part of a paid role elsewhere, with others playing their own part as a pro bono basis. Neither of these models requires direct funding. If we accept that LSEPs have altered the arithmetic around cultural and artistic education, then it is our responsibility to ensure that they continue to grow. This is a choice that we should be making. Waiting passively for the outcome of a strategic decision that is yet to be made elsewhere by others has never been the hallmark of a restless and ambitious movement. As LSEPs, we must resist the temptation to view the potential withdrawal of funding as a sign that the project is over and the game is up. At an uncertain time, what is clear is that children and young people, schools, arts and cultural organisations and the like will continue to exist. Harnessing our collective imagination, resilience, commitment and determination will ensure that our work will continue beyond March next year and that our education cultural ecosystem continues to grow and thrive. This seems to be the most appropriate response and one that shows the greatest level of respect and care for our children and young people who are, very often, much more creative than us anyway.